Well, hello everyone. Happy Friday. Great to have you all here. Now that we're at the top of the hour, we'll go ahead and kick off. Just a heads up, we will be recording this, so feel free, you'll get a copy of this after this, so feel free to review it again or share with anyone that you might think would find this interesting. But it's great to have you all join me today. I'm Catherine Huddleston, and I lead the Client Success team here at Work Institute. So I'm joining you, as you can see from my small background. You can see that I'm sitting at my kitchen island. I actually, pre-pandemic, for the last few years, I've actually always worked from home if I'm not traveling to our clients or in our Nashville office. So I do have a full office set up officially in our basement, but it's Friday afternoon, and I could no longer stare at the four walls of my office. So I decided to relocate for a little bit of a change of scenery while spending a few minutes with you all today. I've locked my husband and my dogs in the aforementioned basement, so fingers crossed we won't have any awkward viral moments with anybody, unexpected visitors walking by. I also hate to ramble on without anyone's input, so you may have noticed that there's the chat function or the Q&A section. Feel free to add any comments or questions in there as we go through the presentation. I've got my colleague William Mahan is our moderator today, and so he's going to be monitoring both of the Q&A and the chat features. So if you do have any comments, questions, put those in there. If it's relevant to what we're talking about, he'll pop in and throw those my way. Otherwise, we'll address anything lingering at the end. And certainly if you have any technical difficulties as well, just chat William and he will get you settled. So over the years at Work Institute, I've worked with hundreds and hundreds of organizations across a broad range of industries to help guide them to uncover what factors really drive their employees away, what caused them to be motivated to stay, so that they can, make their workforces the strongest and most engaged possible. If you've ever worked with me, you've definitely heard me preach to ignore industry benchmarks and instead focus on your own data to drive meaningful action to improve employee retention and engagement. However, as you know from the topic of this, I'm actually here to talk to you today about early workforce trends across all of our clients. The COVID-19 pandemic has forced us all to enter a new world, and it's more important than ever that we come together to learn from our collective successes and failures. So our agenda today, I'm going to kind of start with a few basics around strengthening workforce communities so that we kind of have all on the same page. And then we'll talk a little bit about what the data we have. So you have that foundation. I'll get into the key trends of the early trends that we're seeing. We'll talk a little bit about you as a leader. What can you do today? And then I'll share some positive examples and give us some real life things that are going well in some of our organizations. And then again, have plenty of time for Q&A at the end. So first things first, if you have attended any of our webinars already, you may have heard a member of the Work Institute team get on our newest soapbox, and that's about the term social distancing. So we want to get our terminology correct. The social distancing rhetoric is rampant. I actually looked it up in the dictionary. I wanted to see what my friends over there at Webster had to say, and I figured if it wasn't already in the dictionary, it certainly would be one of those words that gets added in the next year. But it actually is a legitimate phrase. According to Webster's dictionary, its first known usage was in 2013. But at Work Institute, however, we have to disagree of the use of the terminology. Social distancing is really the last thing we want to do. We think that you should really be talking about physical distancing in order to protect our health, especially as some of our communities are loosening restrictions on where we can go, what we can do, and who we can see. Especially here in my new hometown of Atlanta. I've been here a few months. We are leading the charge on loosening restrictions, as I'm sure you know. But we need to continue to practice physical distancing. We need to be mindful of our physical health and continue to adjust our behaviors accordingly. Nevertheless, that doesn't mean we have to reduce our social interactions. Instead, get creative and facilitate experiences that you might not have had otherwise. And I'm laying this foundation for our later discussion because I think this concept of encouraging social interactions is going to be really critical as we talk about some of the things we as leaders can do. So Zoom has obviously taken the world by storm over the past 8 weeks or so. We at Work Institute, we've been using that as our standard WebEx video conference platform for years. I literally spend hours upon hours each day on Zoom. But 8 weeks ago, I never would have thought to use it with my friends and family. Sure, I've used it in kind of my non-work life, you know, with volunteer committees or nonprofit boards where maybe we can't coordinate our schedules to get together in person, but that always seemed kind of pseudo-professional. I've never thought to invite my friends or family to have a Zoom call. But now, as I'm sure many of you do, I have standing weekly calls with my immediate family and groups of friends from college. But the funny thing is that none of us live in the same city anyway, so it's not like we're replacing in-person gatherings. We've actually used this pandemic to start new traditions. And you're going to hear me talk a lot about creativity, again, getting creative with your employees. So I wanted to share 2 examples that happened to me yesterday of how to creatively repurpose our time during this period of physical distancing. So yesterday I was supposed to attend an all-day women's leadership forum with hundreds of women in the Atlanta community. But obviously that's not possible right now. So rather than canceling it, the hostesses repurposed it into a half-day Zoom meeting. It was great because, again, hundreds of women were able to learn and grow in community despite this physical distancing. And a little bit more fun, last night I did a virtual Zoom flower arranging class hosted by a local florist. I've been wanting to go, but being new in town, didn't really have anyone to go with. But this virtual venue really stripped away the awkwardness of not knowing anyone. And I literally met 15 new friends. I saw into their homes. I saw them, you know, drinking wine or having a snack while we all arranged flowers together and learned a new skill. So physically distancing myself has kept me safe, but I haven't distanced myself socially. And therefore, again, that's what we have to encourage our employees, our colleagues, our teammates to do, is to continue to develop their social interactions. So I go to the next slide. So that segues us into your job again as a leader. As I gave you my ramblings, just start getting your mind working on repurposing the current terminology. So whether you hold a formal leadership position or you're an informal influencer on your own team, it's your responsibility to emphasize a strong workforce community. We need to make sure our employees are safe, you know, to the best of your abilities. Both, you know, literally safe, but also that they feel safe. Those could be 2 different things. And it's important to know that that is critical, especially now more than ever. Make sure that they're connected through non-traditional and creative ways, just like I was just talking about. You know, keeping them connected. It doesn't look like sitting in a conference room anymore. But just because we aren't all in the same building, it doesn't mean that we can't continue to build that workforce community. Also, give them a purpose. You know, some employees are busier now than ever, but others' daily workflows have been greatly disrupted. Make sure that they know that their work is tied to company goals and objectives, so they know that getting up each day is meaningful. So now that I've given some random tangents on some of the basics, let's switch gears to the real reason why you've joined me today. So what are the early voice of the employee trends that we're seeing during the COVID-19 pandemic? I mentioned at the top when we reviewed the agenda that I wanted to give you a little bit of a foundation as to what we're looking at. I always like to have context around things that I'm seeing. So for those of you who may not know Work Institute, we are a workforce research and consulting firm. So everything that we do is rooted in research. We, whether via telephone or via an online portal, we collect feedback from employees throughout the employee life cycle. So I took all of our research is very heavily qualitative as well. So we ask, you know, why did you leave? And they can give in their own words exactly why they left, or rate your supervisor and tell us why. So we've got a lot of really rich data. So over the past few weeks, I've said, you know what, I've helped a couple clients look at their specific data. We've done some keyword searching to see, you know, what mention of COVID-19 has popped up. But I really said, you know what, let's start to see what is our collective employee base saying. As I mentioned, we typically want our clients to look at their data, but I think it's critical now more than ever to look at this collectively and see what we can learn and grow from each other. So I've taken all the comments that we've collected from March 1st to 2020 to now. This includes feedback from newly hired employees, tenured employees that we've done through stay interviews, as well as exit employees, those who have left the organization. And when I first started to plan this webinar, my immediate reaction was really to just focus on the exit interview data, thinking, okay, how and why is the coronavirus already driven employees away? But as I did start to look at some of the more current employee work, I really realized that the data that we were beginning to collect supported a theory that I had developed, and I'm sure I'm certainly not the only one, that many employees are hunkering down to help their coworkers, customers, clients, patients get through this. But if they're feeling mistreated by their employer, you certainly should be prepared for them to walk out the door when the worst of the crisis is over. Please note that you can see in this graphic, 71% of our clients are healthcare. So as I start to share some of the trends and give you some examples of the qualitative feedback, know that there is a good amount that are related to that specific work environment. But regardless, there are still many lessons that we can learn that can be applied to companies in any industry and of any size. There are a handful of, I will say, I looked at, forget the exact number, but several hundred comments that mentioned coronavirus, pandemic, et cetera. Fewer than 10 mentioned them in a positive context. So I just thought that was really, really powerful that unfortunately, there's a whole lot more mistreatment than there are positives. But we will actually look at some of those positive comments later on. So I focused on 4 key questions. Why did you leave? Obviously, that's only related to the exit interview data. But for all of the research, we asked, how would you rate the organization as an employer? How would you rate your direct supervisor? And are you aware of any compliance, illegal, unethical activities? So all of the qualitative trends that I pulled came from those 4 questions. So at a very 50,000-foot view, the main themes that we saw were proactive actions taken over potential concerns of family or friends, and we'll dive into that. The management of the crisis, so leader behavior, and that's the crux of what we're able to control as leaders. And then personal safety concerns, very concrete examples of that. So the first one is putting personal and familial health first. In this case, this was a lot of employees in the exit interview space who have already chosen to leave as a proactive measure to protect themselves or a family member or someone on their quarantine, to use some more of the fun new rhetoric that's going out there. So people that had pre-existing medical conditions or their age. These are, you'll see on the subsequent slides, I have included a lot of sample comments. These are word for word exactly what the participants told us. So these are probably the trend that's the least controllable, though about 25% of the comments fell in this bucket. I did want to reemphasize my earlier diatribe about building strong workforce communities in the context of this trend. So I highlighted safety as a key component. Don't shy away from talking to employees both collectively and individually about the realities of their job during this crisis and how it may impact their physical health or the health of a loved one. These can be difficult conversations, but they must happen. But we've certainly seen that even though the employee may still ultimately choose to leave, because that may be the best decision for him or her, but if you're empathetic, if you show compassion and support, you're going to maintain a positive personal relationship. And also, let's be honest, protect their opinion of your brand. So maybe they have to choose to leave, but this could lead to, but if you handle the situation well, you maintain, relationships with them, this could lead to a potential re-recruitment opportunity, when things settle down. Or at the end of the day, they've still had a positive experience and will maintain a champion of your organization. So the second reason, leadership, or that lack thereof, as our data is showing us in this crisis. So leader behavior by both direct supervisors and upper management drove employees to leave their places of employment. Mostly the trends were around dissatisfaction with how employees were treated and how information was communicated. So some of these are a little bit longer. This slide was a little busy, so I went ahead and bolded some of the key themes that I saw. So things didn't feel like they were supportive of me being safe. This one broke my heart. Leaders were sarcastic about us all being in masks. Lack of communication, didn't know how to approach new patient care guidelines. This person contracted coronavirus and their manager never once asked about their health. Didn't feel like they could work with someone who doesn't care about their employees' health. Another supervisor came to the nurse station and said, you guys need to stop being so anxious about the coronavirus. It's not a big deal, it's just the flu. These are just obviously specific examples of some of the things that we're seeing in the data. Then we get to the third reason, that there are significant concrete concerns around personal safety and lack of PPE. An alarming number of employees are being told by leaders that they can't wear PPE, which includes their own personal masks. Additionally, organizations are lacking proper oversight practices that are starting to become normal during the pandemic. So same thing, I bolded some of these comments so you can see the really crux of each verbatim comment. But I know that you may not be responsible for developing company policy or the speed with which your organization can obtain necessary PPE, but you need to do whatever you can to advocate for and to support employee safety to alleviate their fears. I think it's the second one, no accommodations to put in place to practice social distancing, or what we would want to call physical distancing, minimal disinfectant. That's just, that's a leader behavior. It's got to sometimes start from the ground up. So keep in mind that this is something that's definitely a growing trend in workforces today. So then there were a couple other kind of secondary issues just that were not insignificant, so I wanted to point those up. So general fears, employees are just scared. They may not know why, but they know their basic human needs aren't being met, and their gut reaction is to remove themselves from the situation. Again, how do you have those difficult conversations around safety? Maybe they're not at an at-risk population. Again, they're just nervous. Having proactive conversations to help them talk through their fears may be what needs to happen in order to keep them sane and keep them with the organization. Childcare, not a whole lot we can do. Obviously, we all know that employees are having to sacrifice their jobs, which means their income, which means their work community, in order to stay at home with all of our schools and daycares being closed. We're also seeing some folks, again, retire early because they're in an at-risk population. Again, not as controllable, but certainly knowledge being lost by those who have left the organization sooner than we had anticipated. And then college, school, mostly around college students. They were either working their jobs and they had to quit because maybe they moved home because the dorms closed, or they were doing an internship and they had to leave because their internships was canceled. So won't even start on how that's going to impact their future. So what can you do today? What can you control to help your organization and its workforce survive and ultimately thrive? And again, I took this slide and I added, it was tips for leaders, and I decided to add and colleagues, because as I've alluded to earlier in my presentation, we're not all direct leaders, but we're certainly influencers. So whether you're directly a leader or you're showing leadership within your team, these are all things that we can do. Communicate. Share accurate and reliable information when you can. It's critical that you don't spread rumors or gossip. Only share verified facts. That's these are all good rules of thumb, but especially critical in this time. Share information often and through a variety of channels. Your openness and your honesty is going to be appreciated and the realistic view that you provide your team will help them regain control of their emotions and the realities of their job. Be authentic and compassionate. You know, it's okay not to have all the answers. I certainly don't, but exhibit empathy at all times. This will foster your personal connections and ingratiate you to your team. I really think this authenticity piece is really interesting in the light of this. I mean, I would never have sat here in my living room or my kitchen with a whole bunch of strangers. I would have kept it in my office, maybe not even shared my video. But I think as every day passes, I think we become a little bit more authentic, and we're able to kind of see each other in a different light, whether it's a new colleague or someone we've known forever. So times have changed, and this is the new norm. And I think we should continue the good parts of it. So it's okay to be appropriately vulnerable. People also look to leaders for security. Be grounded. Remain calm, at least on the outside, even if you're not so calm on the inside, and provide consistency with a purpose to maintain that strong workforce community I spoke of earlier. Remind them that their work matters. You know, we aren't all frontline workers providing essential services to help employees find that meaningful work. You know, some of us may not have as many client interactions or as many phone calls as we usually do. So this may give us a time to tackle a wish list project or follow up on a new idea. I know certainly at Work Institute, we've got a lot of internal projects that this has allowed us to really hit the ground running on that. So I'm in some days busier than normal, focusing on more of our internal rather than external projects. It keeps me getting up every day. It keeps me, you know, busy and knowing that even though times are crazy, I'm doing some important work. Also encourage personal development. There's so much new and old content, old content that's being reshared, that's being pushed via social media and other platforms. You know, renowned educational institutions are offering great classes at free or reduced prices. I was walking by, my husband was on a work Zoom call the other day, and one of his coworkers was talking about taking a class at MIT's business school, and it was very much a reduced price. And he was talking about how great it was, and it was something you would have never stumbled upon in any other situation. It was a virtual class, I think, that they offer regularly, but they were offering it again at a discounted price. And he said, you know, this was great. And so this time on our hands has given him the opportunity to explore something new. So inspire yourself and your team to get creative and further your purpose. So as discussed in the first trend that we saw, and touched on it a little bit, keep in touch with your former employees, despite how or why they left, whether they were furloughed, whether they had to be laid off, or they voluntarily left for any of the reasons that we've discussed already. Now you should continue to show that both you and the company care about them as people and maintain relationships with them, again, to help you build your future talent pipeline when it comes time to fulfill pre-COVID business requirements. Are you able to hire back on? Or again, I mentioned maintaining your brand earlier. You know, the way that you treat people during these crises are going to heavily shape how they feel about you as an organization. And they have a lot of friends and family that they're going to tell about it if it wasn't a good experience. So it's critical that you're keeping your pulse on that as well. So that leads us to my final point. Look ahead, plan for the future. Some things will fall into the same routine, but here's your chance to create change. Push for a new, better normal. Maintain the creativity that we've all experienced and exhibited over the past weeks to maximize the employee experience while meeting business needs as we get through this crisis. So as I talked about high level, kind of conceptually things that we can do as leaders, I did want to share, again, some of the handful of positive comments that we've received in the data so far. Keeping people well informed. We've talked about communication. That is critical. Letting them know regularly and through different kinds of venues what's going on, what they need to worry about, all the critical pieces. Check in with people. Reassure them. I mean, obviously, don't give false reassurances. We talked about being honest, not spreading lies, but, you know, making sure that they're okay and reassure them with, well, when you can. Praise people for working hard. Again, maybe different work, but it's work nonetheless, and that needs to be acknowledged. Value employees, again, making sure that they're safe as we build our strong workforce communities. Be the leaders that are supporting them. Make sure, again, where appropriate, to know that they have job security and that you're taking all of the precautions necessary to keep them safe, and that safety is your top priority. So I hope I've provided you with at least a few things to ponder on. After we're done, I encourage you to write down one actionable thing that you want to take away so that you can do today, or maybe Monday, because it is Friday after all. As cheesy as that sounds, I used to kind of roll my eyes when people would say things like that, and I actually did it once. And I literally used that thing I wrote down, that new skill, the next day. And so I've really started doing that to help me create new habits. So my contact information is obviously right here on the page, my email or phone number. Feel free to reach out to me at any point with questions, comments, anything that you might think of. But William, I don't know if there are any questions and comments that anybody's shared already. So if we've got questions, we've got a few minutes left. We can certainly tackle those today.
Nothing yet.
Okay. Well, again, I know it's a Friday, we've got a quiet group, but for those of us on the East Coast, we're over halfway through our day. Those of you on the West Coast, you've got a little bit longer, but I appreciate you all spending a half an hour here with us today. Hopefully this has given you some things to think about. But like I said, please feel free to take my contact information, reach out at any point. If there's anything I can do, you want to brainstorm, shoot around an idea, I am always here. Thank you, William, for coordinating this, and I hope you all have a wonderful weekend.